Chapter 23 deals with actually two major things going on at roughly the same time. Again, this is the lead up to the First World War, which begins in 1914. One of the things that makes the First World War such a dramatic, different war than what we've seen before is the invasion, really, of industry into warfare. And that begins to happen starting in the 1870s with the Second Industrial Revolution. So the Second Industrial Revolution is a major part of this first part of the chapter, and then it moves on into a little bit of politics, and again, leading us up to the First World War, and finally kind of finishes off with a little bit of science. So there's a couple of things going on here. Make sure that you watch your author videos because those help set the stage for you. The first part deals with the beginnings of the Second Industrial Revolution and the transition to steel, transition to new power like electricity, the chemical industry, okay, and what this really means. It revolutionizes. New power means new forms of transportation. You have really the ability to build larger buildings. Without steel, you don't get things like skyscrapers because the old iron just simply didn't have the strength to support large buildings. But now you're going to see that steel is going to certainly make that change. By the time you get to 1914, there's all sorts of revolutionary new things. You have the first airplanes. You're going to be seeing those in the First World War. Not only is improvement in communications, all of these things make really make the Second Industrial Revolution really dramatically different. And of course, like I told you, it's going to bleed over into the First World War too. Anytime you start talking about the Second Industrial Revolution, you also start talking about increases in scope and scale. That means big, okay? We start seeing really what we consider to be big businesses, whether it's railroads, whether it is power thing. If you go and look at this picture, okay, this is a German electrical engineering facility, okay, and factory. So big scale, big stuff, big things. And that means you're going to have bigger industries, bigger factories, and bigger scale. Credit, money, all has to change and all has to adjust. So as you work through these economics, okay, you'll start to see how all of this changes as you move, especially towards the rise of the corporation, big business. This happens in America. It happens in Europe. And the rise of big business is one of the things that impacts not only the economies, all right, but it also impacts people too, because if you have big companies, you need more employees, and so it's going to drag people into some of these industries. So you start to see some of this, and remember that you see one of the biggest things about corporations is they're organized to try to increase profits. So here in America, you have Carnegie Steel. In Pittsburgh, you have all of these different, you have Standard Oil Company organized by John D. Rockefeller. All right, those are big, huge companies, but their goal really was to make profit. And sometimes making profit is ruinous to competition. It's tough on the working classes that get caught up in it because if the goal is profit, then one of the things that capitalists want to do is minimize expenses, and that increases profit. One of your biggest expenses is always labor. So later on, when we start talking about the rise of socialists and socialist political parties, that's one of the reactions to that. And also don't forget that this goes global. Okay, by the time you get to the 1870s, you have the ability to trade, to do commerce, to communicate globally. And so international trade becomes a major part of all three of those big areas: manufacturing, commerce, finance, all of those things. When you get to the next section, you're talking about politics. And so again, watch your author video here because they set this up. But one of the big things that happens in Europe, it doesn't happen as much here. It tries to, all right, but in Europe it does happen, is the rise of socialist parties, the rise of socialism and socialist political parties. And it happens all across Europe. And like I said, it does try to happen here too. The thing is that socialist parties all are working at different, I mean, they have different levels, okay? You have Marxist parties, for example, that follow in the wake of Marxism, where Marx believed that there would be a violent overthrow of the government by the working class, and they would then create a perfect society where everyone would be a worker. Not all of these movements are Marxist. Not all of them are truly socialist. Some of them are very different, like anarchists who want to do away with government completely, or syndicalists, or really these political parties all end up with different goals. Probably the one that will move, or really kind of move towards the center. A lot of countries, end up with social democratic parties that are they are ones that are a little bit more moderate. Okay, they want to see the government take care of the working class better than a purely capitalist government would. So they are ones that are the most successful. In England, you have the Labour Party that was formed. It's moderate, but it does take into account some of the needs for welfare benefits, for housing, for better treatment for the working class. Now, there's always people out there that are going to try to push this further. Okay, and for example, in Russia, anarchists are going to assassinate the czar. There's always violence. In America, this happens too during the labor movement here in America, where socialists, Marxists, and even anarchists get involved in the labor movement. And unfortunately, here in America, the labor movement gets branded really with this extreme form of radicalism, and it makes it very difficult for the labor movement in America to gain any kind of traction, because people were so scared of this red menace, as it became called here, or of the radicalism really of anarchism. So not very successful, but a little bit more successful in Europe. And by the time you get to the beginnings of the First World War, several countries had some form of socialism or some form of socialist party that were in place, and leading up to the First World War. Another movement that's dealt with in this part of the chapter is the suffrage movement, the women's movement. Most of us are familiar with the suffrage movement here in America. You're probably not as familiar with the suffrage movement in places like Great Britain. The drive to get women the right to vote comes as a result of more women being educated, more women moving into the workplace. And so both women in Europe, and especially in England, and later here in America, began to protest for the right to vote. One of the most famous incidents is covered here, where if you look down here in Britain, in England, all right, some of the suffrage campaigns were violent. They were very um, very protest oriented, and they did some really kind of amazing things. This is Emily Davison, who ran out onto the track in the middle of the most important racetrack, or the most important race horse of the year, race horse race of the year, sorry. And she basically threw herself in front of the horse, trying to trip the horse up. The horse trampled her to death. So this is, I mean, these are very gung ho. These are very dedicated women, and they are committed to doing a lot of things to try to get the vote. In 1910, this is covered. The suffragists attempt to enter the House of Commons, and a 6-hour riot breaks out. The with women being violent, it was eventually you get to the point where women will get the right to vote, both in England and here in America. One of the things that spurs that on, like I said, was women entering into the workforce, and women entering into places that they had never been able to move into, mainly because of the Second Industrial Revolution. So they moved into secretarial jobs, they moved into clerks, they moved into hospitals, then they moved into education. So this is a major way that women could pressure for the right to vote, especially since they are making money and they want to be active in politics. These women really kind of wanted to change their image of being helpless, and eventually gain the right to vote. The uh, the next thing that's covered is some of the problems leading up to the First World War. In any class, when you start getting towards the First World War, we start looking back at causes for the First World War, and you see some of these problems starting to emerge. In France, you're going to deal with the aftermath of the Franco-Prussian War, which ends terribly for France. You you have the Paris Commune, which is the where the Paris essentially kind of goes its own way and becomes a very radical city, and they have to deal with what happens there. Then you have later on you have the Dreyfus Affair, all right, and you can read about this. Alfred Dreyfus was a Jewish captain on the general staff. He was accused of spying for the Germans. Already, the power of a unified Germany is scaring everyone, and Dreyfus, who was Jewish, was accused of selling or selling French secrets to the Germans, when in reality the person that really accused him was the one that was doing it. Dreyfus was convicted, sent off to Devil's Island, where he was expected to die, because the Devil's Island was such a ghastly, horrible place. 2 years later, they found out who the real guy was, but Dreyfus wasn't given a new trial. It becomes a huge scandal. Even though they found out who was really doing it, they wouldn't give Dreyfus another trial, mainly because he was Jewish. And so it turns into a huge scandal, and eventually Dreyfus was brought back and was given his freedom, and was reinstated. So this is a great example of something that's starting to creep in, and it's anti-Semitism. And of course, you'll see that take into a whole new level when we get to the Nazi Party later on. Zionism, the Jews responded to a lot of this by especially things like the Dreyfus Affair and constant anti-Semitism in places across Europe, where many of these people many of the Jewish people that become convinced that the way to escape a lot of this anti-Semitism is to create their own Jewish homeland. And that becomes really the strategy that's called Zionism. So you have this movement that will try to get a Jewish homeland, and of course that does happen later on. when Israel was created after World War II. The next section, you deal a little bit with Germany. You guys can read that. But really, during this period of time, Germany is becoming a major world power. It is strengthening, and eventually it is going to become a very aggressive foreign power. When the old king, Wilhelm I, dies, he will be replaced by his son, Wilhelm II. And Wilhelm II is a bully. He is pushy. He is militaristic. He's bombastic. And one of the worst things he does is gets rid of Bismarck. Bismarck had kept this whole sort of arrangement together by and kept Germany out of wars by basically sort of creating this a system of alliances that Wilhelm will then systematically tear apart after Bismarck is sent packing, and he will disappear really from German politics. You'll read about the British in the up to the eve of the First World War. So you'll read about the Liberals, and well, you'll read about the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and you can talk about how the British are trying to recover from things like the Boer War, where they are trying to replace their or modernize their military. But by far the biggest thing that happens in the lead up to World War II happens in Russia. So this part is really important, okay? And really what you're leading towards, what you're getting towards here in this stuff that I've highlighted, all right, is the beginnings really of an alternative political party in Russia. You're moving towards the beginning of the Bolshevik Party. So the under Lenin, and make sure that you read that. Lenin is really he is a voice pushing for revolution. 1905, you get one. The Russian Revolution of 1905 was it's really probably the French Revolution finally making it to Russia. It takes it until 1905 to get there. But what eventually happens is that you do have a revolution break out in Russia. And so you have workers go out on strike. You have you have them pushing for reforms that Tsar Nicholas will eventually have to guarantee things like individual liberties. Which the Revolution of 1905 is one of those things that kind of tells us that Russia is in trouble, and that it's going to have a very difficult time during the First World War. There's another place where you can read about the Ottoman Empire, all right, which has been around for a while, but the Ottoman Empire is going to try to modernize itself during this period with the rise of the Young Turks. So you'll need to read about this section as well, where the Ottoman Empire, which is basically this area that you see right here, is beginning to change and evolve. Finally, the last section deals with science, and you'll come across things like Darwin's theory, all right, which of course is evolution. You'll talk about religious challenges. This is really important. It doesn't look like it, but social Darwinism is a big deal, okay? And it's really an attempt to apply Darwin's theory to us. And what it is it's where we get the survival of the fittest idea. All right, Herbert Spencer is really the one that coins that phrase. It's not done to apply to animals. It's really done to apply to us, okay? And so read about social Darwinism here. You'll see it happen, and essentially the fittest will survive. And so it's one of those things that does eventually kind of force its way into and become a very racist thing as well. You read about the psychology of Sigmund Freud. You can read about this thing or about Freud. You'll kind of finish up talking a little bit about the impact of this on religion, okay, and of new science and new psychology, okay, the press, the new ways of getting information, the novel. All right, so there is Leo Tolstoy, one of the great Russian writers. So you can kind of finish up with a little bit of art, okay, modernism, and painting and art that comes out of this period. All right, so including some of the works of Picasso. Now, here's the thing, okay? Make sure that as you kind of go through this, you understand that this is all a setup. Okay, much of the stuff that we have been doing in these past 3 chapters is leading us to a point that we're going to talk about in the next chapter, which is World War I. So this period of time from 1870 to 1914 or so, or even 1848 to 1914, is this massive time in Europe where you have nations emerging, like Germany, that are extremely powerful. The balance of power has been disrupted. There is competition among these nations for resources, for markets. Now that you have the Industrial Revolution and the Second Industrial Revolution taking place, there's even more competition and more pressure. And so that competition and that pressure breeds a war. And that will be the First World War, which we'll deal with next time.